Hello, welcome to this week's sermon. This sermon is for the 16th of November 2025, and that will be the 33rd in Ordinary Time, Year C. I'm using the second set of readings, which are Malachi chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, Psalm 98, and Luke's Gospel chapter 21, verses 5 to 19. We don't hear much from the prophet Malachi in our church readings. Perhaps it's as well. He is a bit of a misery. He was a minor prophet living after the return from exile in Babylon. He was a contemporary of Nehemiah, who had to come from Babylon to supervise the completion of the city walls. We've been hearing all about Nehemiah in some recent sermons. The temple rebuilding had been finished, but the rebuilding of the walls languished, and the religious life of the city had not come back alive in the way that the first returnees had anticipated. Everything seemed to have run out of energy. Malachi was addressing a period of decline in religion and moral standards. He wanted to energize people in a period of drift and stagnation. His tactic was both to promise and to threaten. The day of the Lord is coming, he warns, and people will either burn like straw or they will rise with the sun. Prophecies of doom and punishment are not in short supply among Israel's prophets, but with Malachi there is a significant twist. Unlike prophecies such as Isaiah 11, where a green shoot shall rise up from the stump of Jesse, suggesting there is hope that life, once purified by the coming calamity, will continue in its renewed form, in Malachi there is no such promise. It is a final judgment he seems to be describing. Malachi makes a fitting end to the Old Testament from a Christian perspective, and a useful pointer to the Christian New Testament to follow. But what do we make of such talk today? People may still be open to the idea that on the political and economic and practical level, when governments fail, economies go off the rails, or individuals fall into some trap of their own foolish or unlucky choices, a day of reckoning will surely come. Such a day of reckoning may be the next election, or the bond market saying stop, or the individual facing court, bankruptcy, or divorce. But do people still take seriously the notion of a day of reckoning in the biblical existential sense? In the medieval period, the fear of judgment was a major preoccupation in art, theology, and common spirituality. Perhaps this is because they faced a constant threat of death, war, and pestilence. The Black Death of the 14th century cast a long shadow upon the souls of the faithful. Nostradamus was medievalism's last gasp. The Renaissance threw aside such gloomy prognostications. Humanism within art, literature, and theology held sway, with a joyful celebration of the human form in the works of Da Vinci, Botticelli, Raphael, and Michelangelo. The rationalism of the Enlightenment, which followed, freed us from the chains that had held medieval people in such sorrowful trembling for so long. Rational thought, freed from medieval superstition, would lead humanity to a safe, peaceful, prosperous, and humane world. So why are we still speaking of the Day of Judgment today? Why can't we shake it off for good? Well, it's because the belief in the beauty, wisdom, and benevolence of enlightened Europeans fell in a hail of bullets at Verdun, the Somme, and Passchendaele. The Holocaust incinerated any remnants of such optimism in human benevolence in the crematoria of Auschwitz. Even the good news in Malachi's promises isn't unadulterated good news. Those who are proud and evil will lose everything. They will be burnt away like straw. There will be nothing left of them. But for the obedient, the sun will rise upon them with healing in its wings. So even those who revere the Lord and are spared the fiery furnace of judgment still require healing. No one will be saved because they are perfect. Ultimately, God is the only hope of a new world free from sin and corruption. Do people ignore the idea of spiritual and existential judgment because it is too unpalatable to contemplate? Or do we avoid the topic because although we share Malachi's sense that we are all sinful and evil, at least to a degree, but since the upheavals of the Renaissance and Enlightenment and the horrors of the 20th century, we have lost touch with Malachi's other belief in a God who saves and heals. Perhaps facing up to our existential shortcomings is impossible without a loving God to turn to. With a loss of faith in God, there is little interest in facing our sinfulness. It's not just the secular world which has turned its back on the notion of divine judgment, of course. We don't feel all that comfortable with it even inside the church nowadays. We look askance at those who rattle on about it. We dismiss them as fundamentalists and criticise their literalistic and often self-righteous presentation, whilst not actually taking the subject matter itself seriously. In dismissing the way others present the idea, we think we have dealt with the substance of the idea itself. But that's the danger of belief. Not just religious belief, but political, scientific, whatever body of opinions you wish to name. We all tend to cherry-pick our beliefs. We skip over the wounding thorns and gather the succulent fruits of good news into our own private basket of faith. We may wish to forget Malachi's warning about what awaits the proud and evil and focus on the unadulterated good news of Psalm 98. For Psalm 98 is a joyful song of praise because God is keeping his promise and is coming to reign. This will be in his own power and holy strength. The promised salvation starts as keeping faith with the people of Israel, verse 3, but is world-encompassing by the end, verse 9. God will rule the peoples of the world with justice and peace. Now that's the sort of God we are interested in. But we must be aware of the danger of believing only the things we choose to believe in because they are to our immediate advantage, and overlooking anything that challenges our complacency. Jesus warned the disciples not to fall into the trap of believing things because they wanted them to be true. He warned them not to be taken in by those who would keep popping up, declaring themselves to be Jesus himself returning in glory, or proclaiming the end of the world is nigh. Don't be deceived, said Jesus. Just because you hope for something does not mean any and every hint of such is the real deal. But it's not just religious people who fall prey to believing only what they want to believe. Politicians can easily fall into this trap. Most people of sensitivity and intelligence stay out of politics because it is a bruising and unforgiving arena where you have to put up with things that an employee in any other place of work would not be expected to tolerate. It would be classed as bullying. In the world of politics, His Majesty's loyal opposition are actually paid to find fault with everything you do or say. It must get terribly tedious being unable to have serious conversations about anything complex because you get shot out of the water with outrageous criticism or deliberate traducing. So politicians either get out or grow a thick skin. But then they start to attribute every criticism as being just the political manoeuvring of the opposition. And they become deaf to people's real concerns and quickly become out of touch. They start to believe all the good things they say about themselves and their party and dismiss all the negative as mere politicking. Neither is it just the politicians that faces the danger of believing all criticism is nothing but a self-serving grab for power or privilege. If you're the boss, for instance, if you're the boss, you put down all the grumbling to the unions or typical employee behaviour trying to manipulate you into paying more. If you run a church, you dismiss any criticism from the pews as being theological ignorance. Artists and film stars inhabit a glitzy world of make-believe of their own devising and can start to believe all those flowery things they hear from their privileged friends at the Oscars. They then stand at the awards ceremony podium and spout facile nonsense, thinking they are educating the great unwashed. Be on your guard, everyone. Don't just believe what you want to believe. Listen to the difficult things too, not just the smooth words. Having warned the disciples to take a breath before they being taken in by every passing rogue, Jesus went on to tell them that before they could expect a joyous conclusion with the coming of God's kingdom on earth, things would have to get very much worse than they can currently imagine. This is probably not the answer the disciples were hoping for. The temple will be completely destroyed. In AD 70, that came true, literally, historically. But clearly, it has eschatological tones as well. It is not a partial saving, but a destruction of everything that has become corrupt. A radical and thorough judgment is coming, and a completely fresh start is promised. There is no suggestion of a rebuilt temple, but a new temple. In other words, things will get worse before they get better. The list of worldly disasters, from war and civil strife to earthquakes and famine, are illustrative of the whole world in utter turmoil. It may be poetic flourish, we can admit that, but the message is clear enough. Things can and will get much worse before the faithful know the serenity of heaven. This is another example of things we may wish not to believe because it is too uncomfortable. But warnings of terrible times ahead are not wholly negative. Indeed, they are vital if we are to prepare for the struggles of the future. For the Church has learnt over the centuries that the path to heaven is littered with obstacles, with traps of our own making and those laid by others, as well as the occasional wandering off down roads that lead to nowhere. So Jesus wants you to consider all the possibilities carefully before you opt for one vision of the future or another. Do not choose out of fear or ignorance. Do not choose naively, thinking only good things lie ahead. But choose only after careful thought, because otherwise you will not be prepared for the future when it does arrive. Ultimately, of course, the future will be God's future. But there will be many bumps along the road before we reach that ultimate destination. Amen.